Let's see if we're live. I think we are. Just you might hear a little echo for a second. Let me just verify this is going. Let's see if there it is. All right, cool. I am going to close this window and I guess I can go ahead and get started talking about what I'm building and why I'm doing it. So first of all, I should just say that I sometimes just need an excuse to do a live stream. So sometimes I build these apps and it's not exactly the most efficient way to do it. Like for this in particular, I could probably just use a Notion document or an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. But I need an excuse to be able to build software to create content for all of you. So that's what I'm doing. So what is it I'm building? Well, me and a friend, we play a lot of video games, well, occasionally, but one of the video games that we've been playing a lot lately is CTR, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. It is a kart racing game, and one of the things that we've been doing, we've been kind of competitive towards each other in basically seeing who could get the fastest times on each time trial on each track. And so what we started to notice was that it's getting kind of hard to keep track of it just through text message, because we may have like 5 or 6 records that we have and just sending each other these messages all the time. It's kind of hard to keep track of all of it. So I just had the idea I would just build an app that will allow us to keep track of it much more simply and elegantly. I think how I'm going to approach this is using a React application for the front end. Then in order to store all of this information about the tracks and the scores, I'll be using Firebase for that. Potentially a little bit overkill, but the reason why I want to use it is because when I deploy this to Vercel, this in my opinion is just the easiest way to have like an active database in that setting. So I'm going to use Firebase for that. And I'm basically going to create, like if I think about it from a UX perspective, the idea here is I'm going to have a screen, and on there it's just going to be me and this other person. His name is Will. So it'll probably be Z for Zach and W for Will, and a tile for each of us on the main screen that shows Z or W, depending on who you're looking at, and their number of, let's say, top scores. So if I have 5 tracks where I have the best score, you'll see a number 5. And if Will has 7 tracks that he's the best at, that he has the best times for, you'll see a number 7. So that'll be the main display. And then you will also probably want to go and look at each individual track and see maybe the history of times or the best time for each. So that's the 2 views that I'm thinking. You basically have this main view with just me and him and the total. And then you also have a list of all the tracks where you can see the top score for each of those. So I'm going to go ahead and start off. Actually, what I should probably do is start off by creating a React app, because we know that's going to take a few seconds. So we'll do that. And I'll just call this CTR score keeper. And while that's running, I can kind of multitask here, come over here, and let's do CTR score keeper. And yes, I confirm. So I don't really need analytics for this, so we're going to create this project. Now I have both of these things kind of running at the same time, just to save a little bit of time, trying to be efficient. So definitely going to use raw CSS. And I think in this live stream, I want to get as far as even deploying it, but we'll see how the time goes. All right, that is done. Now I have the project set up in Firebase. And the first thing I need to do is probably, I think usually you have to create an app. So get started by adding your first app. This is going to be a web app. I don't want to set up Firebase hosting, so we'll call this CTR score keeper web, and then register that. Then it's going to spit out some credentials, and I'll need that shortly. These are the credentials that I will need. Now, I've used Firebase a lot in the past, so I'm going to use an old project of mine to kind of use as reference for the code so that I can kind of not have to type all this out manually. So I think I'm going to save this screen right here for now, and I'll have to come back and initialize the Firestore, because I'm going to use Firebase Firestore as the database. Cool. Let's see if this is done yet. This is still running. So I just need to wait for this to complete before I can open it in VS Code and start all that. Wow, this looks crazy. Well, it's getting there. So while that's happening, basically I'll explain how this sort of setup works. I'm going to install an older version of Firebase. The newer versions of Firebase, like Firebase 9, has a completely different API that you interact with. I'm way more familiar with 7, so I think I'm going to be installing Firebase 7.22.1. And I can just verify that really quick by going to my package.json for this project. And if I look, yeah, 7.2.2.1. So this is the version of Firebase I'm going to be installing. So I'll actually just add that directly to the package.json and then run npm installer yarn whenever we're done. Okay, cool. So we can go into the project now and open it with VS Code. I'm going to do my best to make things a little bit bigger so everyone can see it. That should do. And then in the package.json, like I said, I'm going to throw this in there. So now we have Firebase listed as a dependency. And if I run yarn, do I want to use yarn or do I want to use npm? Well, I'm going to just do npm because it might be a little simpler right now, but I know it runs a little slower than yarn. Hopefully we don't take too much time doing these small things, but usually what I'll do is I'll kind of do a lot of this before the live stream, but I didn't want to do this time. I actually want to run through it. So let that do its thing for a minute. All right, so now that I have that, I can go back to here, and I believe it was in a shared service folder. So basically I'm going to follow this similar pattern to this project that I did a long time ago. But I'm going to be using I don't think I'm going to use a .env for this. I'm not really worried about making this super production ready because this is just a silly project for me and my buddy. All right, so this is almost there. While that's running, I might as well go ahead and start setting up my file structure that I prefer. So we'll have a components folder, and in here we'll create an app folder. That's supposed to be a folder. Here, let's delete this. That's supposed to be a folder. There we go. And then I like to export everything through index files. And we'll be exporting it like this. And that's that. So I'll drag in my app.js file to my new folder that I just created. And let's get rid of this sort of default stuff that we're not actually going to be using. I don't think we need to actually import React from React anymore, but I like to do it anyway. And now we have this, and I can just say something like this is the app component. And let's get this to render. I'm going to delete this app.css because I'm going to use CSS modules. Get rid of the test, don't need that. Going to get rid of the logo, which I will not be using. Let's see if that is still running. So, all right, so we're done running the npm install. So all of our dependencies should be up and running. So I should be able to run this in just a moment. I have to change the way that I'm importing this. One of the things that I love to do is to set up a prettier file. So the first thing I'll do is throw this prettier file in here. This will just make it really easy to auto save and format my document. So let's do that. .prettier rc. And this might have actually been a JSON. Nope, it's not. Cool. So we'll paste that in. And if I backspace, you see there's no empty line. If I save, it kind of adds it automatically because I have my settings set up to auto save and format on save, I mean. All right, so I don't really care too much about ESLint for this sort of small project. But let's go ahead and add one more thing. It's a JS config file. And I think I have one set up. This is a TS config. It's very similar. But I think what I'll do is probably go to here, go to my repositories, and my most recent project, I will actually use the JS config here. And what this will allow me to do, it's a JSON file, is to set the base URL to source so that I can use absolute paths. And what I mean by that is if I want to import app from in a more convenient way, I can add an index.js to my components folder and export app from app. And now I can import it like this, import app from components. And to me, that is a lot more convenient. And I'm just gonna clean things up really quick. And I will keep the global CSS because I might need it. Now let's see if this renders. So we'll do npm start and we'll see if it renders anything. What we should see is this is the app component whenever the browser boots up in just a second. I do prefer to use Yarn, but I didn't want to go through that right now because I might have to set that back up globally because I'm using NVM and there's a lot of things going on. But let's just see if this loads. Okay, this is the app component. So now I have my React project set up. I need to go ahead and start setting up Firebase. That way I can, we can just dive right in. I like to set up a shared folder and throw it in here. And honestly, I'm just gonna call this firebase.js. And let's have a look at this. As I said, this is the code that I tend to go back to that I wrote forever ago that sets Firebase up. It just makes it so much easier for me to deal with. Now, I'm gonna copy this and paste it, but I'm not gonna be using storage or auth. I'm only gonna be using Firestore for this, which means I do not need these two imports. And then this is all within a .env file that's being loaded, but I don't know if I necessarily need to do that right now for the stream. So I'm actually gonna just copy this object that I got from my Firebase setup here and probably just paste this in. Let me just make sure there's nothing, okay. So it appears I'm missing something. Okay, let's do this. It's because I accidentally copied this. Oh, I see. I forgot to copy that extra bracket right there, which is very important. Gonna need that. There we go. No more issues. All right. So I think this is gonna be okay to get things going. If I click continue to console, and I need to go to build and then Firestore database. Now from here, I believe I have to actually, yes, create the database. So we're gonna start it in test mode. Yep, that's good. And we're just gonna go with US Central. That's the location of the server for this. The Central United States is probably the best for me. Just setting up some security rules. I might have to change that. We'll see how that goes. All right, so collections are kind of like tables in a database, right? So I think I'm gonna need two collections, one for all of the tracks, which I have a link here with all of the tracks. I'm not gonna manually go in and add every single track in this live stream because that would be super tedious. But we'll need one collection for tracks and we'll need one collection for, I guess we'll say players, and that the two players will be me and my buddy. So I guess I can just start by adding in the first collection that we'll call tracks. And we'll auto ID these. We'll have a name of the track. And let's just grab one that I know we already have times for. Let's see. let's do Cortex Castle. So I will just add that. The name is Cortex Castle. And then we'll also need a time. And the time will essentially just be the like the record, right? The fastest time for that particular course, which I can look up on the text message right now and see the real value. So let's do that. So I'm just pulling up on my phone to see, I think I might not have the record. Oh, I do have the record. Okay, so 229.50. So this will be the value, 229.50. And I think we probably want to say the person who has that time. Actually, you know what? I'm not gonna do that, because what we'll do is we'll use a ID for the person instead of a name, like a string. So for now, we're just gonna have for each track a name. So the name of the track and then the time, the best time. Yeah, so just for now. And I might scale this up later, but just for the sake of this kind of live stream, we're gonna start very simple and only scale up as necessary. So I'm gonna start one more collection. We're gonna call it players. And then we'll have name, we'll do me, we'll auto ID that, and then we'll add one more player, and that will be my buddy whose name is Will, which the field is name and the value is Will. Okay, so now we have two players. So what I'm thinking is, since I have the current record for the one track that we have there, I'm gonna copy my document ID here. That's the document ID, which distinguishes each of these insertions into the table. And in the tracks, I'll actually add a new field called player. And this will just be the person who has the best score for this. So the player is the person who has the best time. The time is the actual time itself. And the name is going to be the name of the track. So for now, I only have one. We'll probably add a total of maybe 5 by the end of this stream. But for now, since I have this data in my database, what I want to try to do is see if I can access that information from within my React application. And I'm going to have to kind of remember how to do that, but I think I can figure it out very quickly. Let's see how I'm exporting it prior, because I want to follow these same patterns. And I think, yeah, I'm just exporting everything from Firebase. So if I go into some hook that I may have created, yeah, like use posts. This will probably be a really easy one. This is a hook I wrote that allows me to grab stuff from Firebase. So I'm gonna copy this again and kind of keep with this same pattern, which means that for each thing that I want to retrieve from Firebase, I want to essentially have a dedicated hook for that, because it makes things more simple in my opinion. So in the shared folder, I'll probably create a new folder called hooks. I said probably, but I'm literally doing it. We'll say use tracks.js. This will be a hook that will allow me to get all of the tracks from Firebase. And we will export this, but let's do export function use oops, don't want to capitalize that, use tracks. Actually, I'm just gonna paste in what I had already copied, but I'm not gonna use an arrow function for this. I don't want to, and this is TypeScript, so I need to get rid of some of the TypeScript stuff. So that's what we're doing now. Replace that with const, and now we have the proper syntax, but I still have to get rid of this sort of TypeScripty stuff, and I'll reword a lot of this as well. So bear with me. Cool. All right, so I don't need that because that was TypeScripty stuff. And instead of use posts, we're obviously going to call this use tracks. And I need to change each of these references here. And the collection name was tracks. If you remember, that's what we created. That's what we named it. I'm not going to use where because I don't need to query this data by any particular property. I don't need to order by a timestamp because I don't think I have a timestamp on these anyway. This needs to be tracks. And we're going to return tracks as well. And I'll kind of explain how this is working very shortly. Just bear with me. I'm almost there. just renaming stuff. Okay, I think everything should be ready. So let's talk about what's going on here. All right, so I'm importing Firebase from shared, but that's not quite the right capitalization here. All right, so FB, if we look in the shared Firebase, we're exporting a const called FB. And this FB is an object, and inside of it is our Firestore. It's our Firestore reference that we want to use. And I'm exporting that from shared. So that's why I can import it like this. Now, inside of the hooks folder, I'm also going to export the hook I just created. And now we have everything kind of exported. And let's talk about what's going on here. So this hook has state, and it's going to be an array of tracks. Now, right now, it's being initialized as undefined. Okay, so initially, this is going to be undefined. Then we have a very simple use effect that's going to run on mount because we have no dependencies passed into the dependency array for this use effect. What this is doing is it's creating an unsubscribe function, and it's going to return this in the end. So this is a way of basically preventing memory leaks. Now, this is going into the Firebase Firestore, that reference that we are creating in our service, and it's grabbing a collection called tracks, and we're doing something called onSnapshot. And I believe onSnapshot means whenever that data changes, this function is going to run. So whenever Firebase out in the cloud receives an update, our code is hooked up to it in such a way where it's going to listen for those updates. And whenever that change happens, we are going to run this function, which in the end, all it does is updates our tracks state. And this hook is always returning the latest version of that. So in any component that we may want to use, I can just import this hook and have access to my tracks. It makes things really, really simple. So in my app component, just to test to make sure that this thing is working, let's try to console.log this. But first we need to import it. So const, and we're going to destructure tracks out is equal to use tracks. Now I want to console.log tracks and see if we're actually getting the data that we're expecting. Now, I don't like that it's shared /hooks. I would prefer to import it just from shared. It's just my personal preference. So I'm going to go to my index here and I want to be able to export use tracks from hooks. And that should allow me to import it like this. It's just a little bit cleaner in my opinion. So let's see if this is working as expected. So I think we're getting an error. Cannot destructure property. Okay, the reason why is because initially tracks is undefined. So we should probably initialize it as an empty array. Maybe. Cool. So right now we're actually getting undefined, which is not the best thing ever. So this is where I'm going to start debugging and trying to figure out exactly what is happening here. So let's console.log within the actual hook itself. And just to keep the logs clean, I'm going to comment out this particular console log. And let's start to log what the snap looks like. So this is the snapshot. So the snapshot is this interesting looking object. Now, let's move this console.log into our for each here and just log each individual snap and see what we have here. Okay, so it's this weird kind of object with these keys that I have no idea what they mean. So basically, we need to do s.data. And that's going to decode that information for me. So now we can refresh. And now we can see that we are getting Cortex Castle, which is great. However, for some reason, we're not actually... let's see if tracks, see we're setting tracks equal to underscore tracks. When we go here, it's not quite, oh, you know what it is? It's not an object. So I need to stop trying to destructure that. Let's see if we get our array of tracks. We do indeed. So now we're getting our array of tracks in our app component using our new custom hook. Now I want to do the same thing for players, right? Because I have tracks and I have players. Those are the two collections that I have in my Firebase. So I'm just going to create a new file called use players and pretty much copy this to a T. The only difference is going to be, again, the naming. So I'm going to just try to do a search replace, and we're going to call this players. Now I'm going to have to change some of the capitalization here. And let's just look through it one time to make sure that everything looks good. So use players, players state, collection is players, players push, da 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 da. Okay, should be good. Let's go ahead and export this. Whoops, that was not intentional. There we go. And then one more place to export that is going to be here, and we can just put it in the same line. There we go. And this is why I like to do all of that exporting, because now I can put it in the same line and it, whoops, not use tracks, use players. And it's a little bit cleaner in my opinion. So let's make sure that we're logging the players just to see if everything is working as expected. So let's log players. Let's see if we're getting the data that we would expect. So refresh. Here we go. We got both of the players. So now I know that my Firebase is up and working as expected, and I can access both the players and the tracks through this very, very simple API. So let's go ahead and use that to begin displaying information that we want to see on the screen. So as I said at the beginning of this stream, what I want to see on this kind of home page here would be two tiles, one for me, basically one for each player, one for me, one for my buddy Will. It's going to display the first letter of our name, so Z and W, and then underneath it is going to be a number which will represent how many of the best times we have. So for me right now, because I only have one track in here, and this particular track, I have the best time, it is going to display Z and then underneath it a 1. And then Will a 0, just because I haven't added all the tracks yet. Then let's just start there, okay? We already have access to the players, right? So I can basically create a new component, we'll call it player tile, and yeah, let's start there, it sounds good. So player tile, let's do a little bit of boilerplate stuff, player tile.js. So it's a function component. Again, don't need to really import React, but I like to do it anyway. And I'm gonna start using CSS modules. So let's throw in some CSS, and then I'm going to import that down here. And let's have this just return a simple div for now with the player name. So this is going to accept a single player, and the player has two properties, a name. Actually, it only has one property right now, so it has a name. And let's give this a class name of main, just to match the CSS that we have here. I accidentally put two D's in the word module, so I'm just renaming that really quick. And for now, I just want to see what happens. Now in my components, I need to go ahead and throw in an index.js both here and also in here. All right, so now I should be able to import it as expected. So I'm just getting rid of a bunch of tabs that I have open. Let's do this. So inside of this main div here, I'm going to loop through each of the players. So for each player, we're going to map through. And let's grab the index. Actually, I'm not going to use the index. And for each of these, I'm going to return a div. No, I'm not going to return a div. You know what? Instead, I'm going to return a player tile. Okay, and we do have to pass in a key. And this will just be player.name. And we also, this player tile is expecting a name prop. So it's going to be the same deal. Name equals player.name. And in theory, when I go back here, I should see both of the names. Okay, I don't yet. And we can question why that is in just a second. But for now, let's make sure everything's imported properly. I prefer to import it through just components. Okay, let's see what's happening here. So console.log, let's make sure again that players is still being retrieved from the database as expected. Yep, it's an array of 2 items with a name and an ID. If I refresh, I'm not seeing the player tile. Why might that be? So we're looping through the players, and for each player, so are we rendering? Oh, we're not returning. We need to return this div. So this component was not returning the div that we were expecting. So now we are seeing the 2 names. That's great. That's exactly what I wanted to see. So this particular tile, it's going to need to display just the first letter of our names. So I would prefer it just be the first letter because we know who we are. It's just way simpler that way. So we're going to do name.split. This is going to break the string into an array, and then we're going to do 0 and then 2 upper case. So now I should just see Z and W. That's exactly correct. Now let's do some styling. Okay, so let's put these both up on the same screen here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Actually, I'm not going to zoom in because I'm going to be making this a lot bigger anyway. So the main here, let's do, I don't know, font size, let's do like 72 pixels. That's a little better, but I think we can go even larger. Let's do 150 pixels. Fair. That's very fair. Now in the app, on the app side, we're also going to need a styles file. And I like to follow the naming convention of main. I know I should probably use a main tag, but it's all good. And then let's import the styles file I just created. Now I have a div called main with a class of main, I should say. And let's do display of flex. So now they appear next to each other. Let's add a box, a gap. Let's do a gap of 25 pixels. How about that? And then in the player tile, on the player tile side, let's add a border of 1 pixel solid black. And I'll change this shortly, but let's do a hard-coded width of 250 pixels and a hard-coded height of 250 pixels as well. And let's set the display of these tiles to flex. And let's do align items center and justify content center. So now both of these are displaying directly in the center. Clean this up just a small bit here. And on the side, on the app side, so the higher order component that's rendering each of these out, I kind of want to get this more in the center of the screen. So the best way to do that would probably be to set the width to 100% and the height to 100%. Where are you at? That's a $. Where's my percent? There we go. And then align items center and justify content center. Now that doesn't quite fix our problem because in our global CSS file, we're also going to need to set the HTML and the body to have a height of 100% and a width of 100%, and that should also need to, the margins already be set, being set to that. Should I do view height? Is that the problem? Okay, let's see why we're not quite getting the height that I would expect. So inside of, oh, we need to target the root as well. So in here, I'll explain this in a second, but let me make sure this actually fixes it. 100%. Yeah, okay, that definitely fixed our problem. Do I need these still? Yes, I do. Okay, so in React applications, what ends up happening is if you look in the public folder, in the index.html file, there is a root div with an ID of root, okay? And the entire React application gets put inside of there, which means that when we looked at this, you could actually see that there is this root div, and we needed to explicitly set the width and the height of that to 100% so that this div was not limiting the contents from being full width and height as well. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so this is looking good. Now what we want to do is below the letters in our name, we want to display the number of tracks that we have the top score for. So again, in my case, we should see a 1, and in the case of Will, we should see 0. So how are we going to do that? Well, and which component's responsibility should it be to manage that particular logic? I'm thinking, just for simplicity's sake, we should probably pass in some more information to these player tiles so that it can go and run these kind of, logic, whatever you want to call it, logic calculations. So one thing that we have is we have the player. So for each track, we actually have a reference to the player ID who has the top score. And in players, we're using the actual IDs here. Now, if we look really quickly at the hooks I wrote, we're taking that ID and actually appending it to the object that we're returning from this hook. So in other words, this player's variable here has an ID property that represents the document ID for each individual player. That's really going to be helpful for us to be able to find the information we're looking for. So let's pass in, let's say that it's the player tile component's responsibility to manage this logic for now. That basically means instead of passing in the name, we should probably just pass in the entire player. So we need to kind of change how we're doing this to take in the player instead of the name itself. And then up here, we can kind of destruct that. So we can pull the name and the ID from the player here. And now in theory, things should still be working as expected. Yep, so we're still working as expected. But now one other thing that this is gonna need is the list of tracks, right? So we need to pass in the list of tracks. And the reason why is because we actually have to do the counting in this component. So we need to pull some things out of the tracks. Oh, since it's an array, we're gonna actually have to have some logic that we iterate over. Okay, so let's do that. Let's do state. Let's use state here. And we're going to call this, number of top scores. Hey, Atul, how are you doing? Number of top scores. I'm doing good. I'm just trying to get this app built. Just having a good day. How about you? And you might hear my dog barking in the background. I apologize. I live in a town where a lot of people walk on the sidewalk by my house, and he loves barking at every single one of them. Set number of top scores, number of top scores, and we'll initialize that as 0. How about that? Then under the name, which I think it would be neat if each of these has their own div and we classify them separately. So we'll say name. What are we building today? Well, we're building a scorekeeping app because me and my friend have gotten competitive on Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. And we basically want an easy way to keep track of our scores because there's so many, like we keep updating them and it's just getting really hard to maintain that through text message. So basically just building this app as a way for us to easily see our scores at all times. And also a tool, by the way, this video is going to be available on my YouTube channel after the live stream is done, once it processes and everything. So if you miss anything, you can always go back and watch. So for this, I'm going to call this div styles.score, and instead of this, we are going to do number of top scores. So for now, they should both be 0. Yes. Now I'm going to jump this back over here, and let's do a little bit of styling, because really we want the number to be underneath the letter, and we want the number to be smaller than the letter. Okay. So instead of doing font size here on the main class, we're going to do this on the name class, which definitely targets the name, but we also want to do a font size on the score. It's just not going to be as big of a font size. Let's just say maybe, how about 48 pixels? What's up, Sudip? I don't know if I pronounced your name right. The text is really small on my screen, and it's like way over there. I hope I pronounced it right, but how are you doing? There we go. I think that is a very decent font size. So the flex direction should be column. Yeah, but instead of centering it, so let's do flex, or I'm sorry, space between, perhaps? Interesting that this is being pushed so far down, huh? It could be that the letter, yeah, that's what I was worried about. So the way that works is so annoying. So let's set we're gonna manually set the height for the text here. The height here is 200. It doesn't need to be that tall. Let's do, I don't know, 150 pixels and just see if that's gonna be big enough. It's closer. What about 125? Let's see what we got going on here. That's too small. We don't really want it to break through. What do we got? Dealing with text in CSS has always been a bit of an annoyance for me, just to be real. So let's do slightly bigger width, and I think that might be, and height, sorry. That might free us up a little bit of space, and I might not have to do the manual height here. Yeah, there we go. I think that looks okay. I'm not super excited about the fact that there's way more padding on top than there is on the bottom, but I'm not gonna get that picky. Let's do maybe a little bit of padding and box sizing, border box perhaps. And I think that didn't really change anything, did it? It did. We're gonna keep it like this. I think this looks okay. Cool. So what's next? Let's actually do the counting, right? So in the player tile, right now we're just displaying 0 because that's what we're initializing the state as. We're not actually running any calculations to determine, you know, whoever has the number of top scores. So let's do an effect that runs based on the tracks, but we're also gonna need the ID of the player. So it's gonna run based on the ID of the player and the tracks. And if you remember, I'll put a little comment here, the tracks has a player which represents the player ID. And if I look at it really quick in here, you can see what this actually looks like. So in the players collection, we have, in the tracks collection, for each track, we have a player property. And this string here represents a player ID. So that's what we're gonna utilize to do this counting. So let's do a loop over the tracks. I'll just basically, I could do a reduce. We could do a reduce. Let's say const sum equals tracks dot reduce. Started at 0. We're gonna have an accumulator and a current value, which I'll just do current value. Now current value is actually gonna be current track. It's gonna be the current track that we have. So if the current track dot player is equal to the player ID, then we want to increment the current sum. So we'll return the accumulator plus 1. Otherwise, we will just return the accumulator. Okay, so now we should have the sum, and at the very end here, we can set number of top scores equal to that sum. And now we should see a 1 and a 0 here. Yes, perfect. So this right here is already working as I wanted to, but let's add some more tracks. So I think we only have a total of maybe 3 or 4 tracks that I need to add. And I'm gonna look at my phone because we've been documenting these through text message. So I have to look at my phone to be able to see the top scores, so bear with me on this. So the first one I'm gonna add right now is Papu's Pyramid. And spelling that is probably, let's see, come on. The search on here isn't great, I guess. Just show me Papu's Pyramid. Where are you at? Where are you at? There it is. So Papu's Pyramid. Okay, so that is the one we're gonna add right now. So let's add a new document, auto ID it. The name is going to be Papu's Pyramid. And actually Will has the current record for that, but I don't have his ID on my clipboard right now, so we'll come back to that in a second. The best time right now is 1:42:10, I think. 1:42:10. That should be the value. There we go. So the time. And that one is going to belong to Will's ID, which is this one. I'm just copying it and bringing it over. Got to add a new field called player. And boom. Now we have Papu's Pyramid. I think I can add one more, which is going to be Hot Air Skyway. And the record, let me scroll up. There we go. Here's the record for Hot Air Skyway. So I'm going to add one more document for the tracks. The name is Hot Air Skyway. The time is actually 2:54:80. Is that a 7? 87. And the player is Will, so that's his ID. And let's auto ID this document. And now we have 3 tracks. So if I go over here, notice that I didn't even have to refresh this page. Like it just automatically updated this to 2. That's because the way that I'm hooking this up through Firebase and my hooks is that it's, again, is running this logic every single time that data on Firebase changes. So since I was changing that information in Firebase out in the cloud, it was sending signals to my app saying, hey, that information changed. Now it's running this function, resetting the state, and then in here, it's literally tied to all of those updates and feeding directly to this component where this information can run in this use effect. That's why React is so powerful. So yeah, so as you can see here, now we have 2 player tiles with the scores, and I think that's all the tracks I'm gonna add for now. I might add a few more but we don't have any scores for those. So this is working, but now what we wanna do is be able to see all of the tracks, and I should be able to maybe either, I don't think I should click on a track. I don't have to necessarily click on a track, but maybe a table, like a HTML table that shows every single track and the best time and who got that particular time. So probably what I should do is use like the React router and have maybe a link up here, or you know what, excuse me, it might be better just to display the table underneath the tiles. That might be the best way to do it. In other words, this is just a literal single page application with no client-side routing, because I don't really need to go that far into this, right? It's that simple. At some point very soon, I'll probably build the capability to edit this information from within the UI itself. And when I do that, I would need like a login button, and I can set up auth through Firebase. But I probably won't do that during this stream. I might though. We'll see how fast I get through all this, and then we can determine that in just a moment. So let's start displaying that table. I'll probably have a separate component for that. So let's do tracks, or maybe score table. Yeah, I like score table. and score table.js export function score table. There should not be an S in there, at least not right there. Import React from React. And then let's do a return. We're gonna return a, whoa, that's not what I meant to do. Return a div with a class of main, you know, just boilerplate stuff that I have to do. Create a styles.module.css file, initialize it with a selector for main, and then index.js. Let's export, what is it again? Score table from score table. And then in here, whoa, that's not what I meant to do either. There we go. Typing too fast for my own good. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So in the app component, let's go ahead and import score table as well. And I like to keep things nice and clean. So we don't need to loop through this part. One second. Might have to sneeze in a second, but I'll try to move away. So what does this score table need? Well, it's gonna need all the tracks, and it's probably gonna need the players as well. So within that component, let's grab those props. Excuse me, and figure out what we're gonna do. So I think we're probably, like I said, we'll probably want to create an HTML table. So Sudip said, why is it module CSS and not .css? So I'm using CSS modules. Let me send you a link really quick. All right, pasting this into the chat. So have a look at that. I'm using CSS modules for my React because basically, let me show you exactly. So pay attention really quick. So if I right click on this, and if we look, what I'm calling this is a class name of name and score, but you can see these unique IDs here. It's basically scoping these class names so that I don't have to worry about naming collisions in my class names, because I like to name things the same, like main. You can see all these mains. These classes are inherently different because they have these unique identifiers on them, and it allows me to keep my code clean, and it's the way that I believe is the cleanest and most efficient in React. But yeah, have a look at that link and look at the documentation. But all right, continuing on. Underneath this, I want to display a table. We're gonna list out every single one of the tracks, and then we're gonna have 3 columns in this table. One is going to be the track name, one is going to be the top score, and one is going to be the person who got that score. You know what's funny is that I have not created a HTML table in so long that I don't even remember exactly how to do it, so this will be fun. I know it sounds silly because it's such a simple thing, but okay, so table, and I believe there's like TH and TD. TH is, so we want to do a T head, right? And then a TH for each individual entry in the head, which there's 3, right? There's going to be the name of the track. There's going to be the top score and person who got said score. So player. And I'm going to change the order here. I would prefer the top score to be the 3rd column. Okay, and then we're going to have the T body. And this is where we're going to loop through. So now we're going to loop through each of the tracks. And so for each track, we will render a TD. And that's going to be track.name. And actually, we're going to render 3 things, right? We're going to name, we need a row. So bear with me while I figure this out. I think it's TR. Could be wrong on this. So for every single track, we want to have an individual row with 3 items inside of it. One for the name. Just for now, I'm actually going to render the name for all 3 columns, just so I can make sure that this table looks accurate. Yes, this is looking fine. All right. So how are we going to get the information that we want for the player and the top score? So we need to be able to figure out, we need some function that I'll run that will determine, so the top score is easy, okay? Because we already have access to that, right? That's actually track.score, or I'm sorry, track.time. So when I save this, now we have the times, but now we need to get the player name who got that score. Well, if we look on each track object, we have a player, but it's actually the ID for that player and not necessarily their name. So let's use that track.id. We're going to basically index. So let's create a function, const get player by ID. And it's just going to accept an ID and return tracks.find. It's going to look through and find the track where player is equal to the ID we passed in. And we'll return this. And since it's a one-liner, I can just do that. And for this, we will simply run this function get player by ID. And we're just passing in the ID, so we would say track.player, I guess. No, we want the player ID. Okay, sorry. Give me 1 second. So in my head, I'm thinking what we really want is to find the player. We want to loop through the players. So this is going to be player ID. Let's just be more specific. So that's what we're passing into this function is the player ID. What we want to do is loop through the players and find the player whose ID is equal to the player ID that we passed into the function. So now that we have that, we just simply want to return the name. Okay, so this might work. Let's find out. Wonder if I can ban this person for spamming. Let's see. Put user in timeout. Yeah. 300 seconds, that's not long enough. Let's hide user on this channel. Report. Spam. Boom. And then hopefully remove them from the channel completely. All right, I think I did it. Sorry, we had a spammer in the chat. This is working good, but let's capitalize this just because, like, you know, you're supposed to capitalize names. So let's do const name equals, then let's basically rebuild it. So let's do return name. Let's do it like this. I'm going to interpolate a string here. Name dot, let's also do like const name array equals name dot split. So I'm splitting the string into a array of characters. Name array 0, whoopsie, 0.2 uppercase, followed by the remainder of the name not uppercased. So name array dot, I guess it's going to be slice, right? I think it's 1 dot join. Is that going to work? Yeah, that actually worked good. Okay. First try too. Okay, so now let's style this table, because this honestly doesn't look great. Before I style the table, let's put the table underneath the thing here. Okay. So let's put the player tiles in a div called player tiles. Okay, that's what I would expect. And in the CSS for the app component, we want to change the flex direction to column. Yep. And then let's select the player tiles, and let's make this flex as well. And do a gap of 25 pixels. I think that looks good. Then inside of the score table, let's grab the table inside of main and see if we can style. You know, one thing that I just like to do, because I'm not much of a designer, honestly. I know how to do CSS and I know how to design, but I'm not good at creating like a good design. I like to go to CSS tables and just find one that looks good. This is perfectly acceptable in my opinion. So if I were to, is there a code example of this? There sure is. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm pretty much just gonna take this . Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm thinking more than I'm talking, which is not good for a live stream. I'm gonna take this and paste it in. I'm gonna replace this with dot main table. Gotta spell that right. And that is good. I just don't like the colors. So let's start by changing the colors. I don't know, we could do like a dark blue. I think that's a little better. I could probably improve it, but it's fine. The width, it says the width is 100%, but we need to change the width here. So let's do 500 pixels. I want it to be the same width as these tiles, honestly, which if we look here, it's 625. So, and I think just having that uniformity would be really nice. I don't know if there's too much more for me to really do. I mean, I can add a few more tracks in there, but there'd be no point really because we don't have any more scores. These are just the 3 that we have. I guess I could just kind of design this to make it look a little bit better, you know? I don't like the light theme look in general. I prefer more of a dark theme. So I'm gonna jump into my global CSS and change the background color to black, but not quite fully black. We're gonna go with like this really, really dark blue, like that. And then for the tiles, we don't really want it to be, I don't think I wanna do color white, because to me that stands out a little too much. So maybe we can kind of take a similar approach and just do like a really light blue, almost purple. Maybe something like that. I don't know. I'm not super into it, but I think it's looking better. Now I have to change the way that this table looks because that's not great either. I think that the table itself has a white border, which I'm not into. So let's do just a darker border, you know, maybe something like really, really dark gray. Or does it really even need a border? We also change that to like a really dark gray. That's not dark enough. And also I kind of want to keep this bluish vibe going. I think that's okay, but honestly, that's better. That's better. So let's take this and set the background color of the even ones to a slightly so much contrast. There we go. What do we think of that? Obviously, I'm changing the color of this as well, which I can quickly do here. Try to find like a nice, like something like that. So if I go to the header and paste that in, I mean, it's not amazing, but it's definitely better, I think. Now it's just a matter of probably changing the font color here, which I think maybe, see, this doesn't look amazing to me at all. But let's go to like, so this even color here, this even color, this guy. Let's go to the player tiles and set the background color of these to that. Okay, that looks okay. I think we're getting somewhere. And I'm not thrilled on this text color here, just to be honest. Let's see if I can find the, I guess this is on the HTML. Yeah, so let's see if we can find a better color, maybe something that contrasts a little better, something like that. What do we think of that? I think that looks okay. I mean, so let's change that to this. And then I think we should have some type of header that says what this even is in the first place. So probably on the app.js, let's throw in a header here. I didn't really need to cut that. Let's do an H1 and we'll just say CTR scores. Yeah, but let's change the color of that. And again, I'll just use this developer tool to, let's start it off as, let's basically copy, come on, the same color that I have here at first, and then let's find a color that complements it. Come on, there we go. So maybe something, as you can tell, I'm definitely not a designer. We'll go with this, and then I'll need to add that color throughout a little bit more just to kind of balance it out, because I think it stands out a little too much. So in here, let's do this. Okay, and then we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna need something that balances out, maybe the score. So if we go to the player tile and we highlight the score, maybe we could do that. It still looks a little weird. Bear with me. Okay, I think that looks fair, but then this just stands out way too much. So I'm gonna basically do the same color as this. Okay. All right. Sure. Yeah, I think that is sufficient. I think what I have here is totally sufficient. So I think that's going to be it for this. Probably what I'll end up, well, yeah, I think that's going to be all for this live stream. I might continue this very soon where I'm going to add in, and it might be like tomorrow or something, where I add in auth so we can log in as an administrator to this and actually add new tracks and add new scores and manage it from the UI instead of having to go into Firebase console and adding and managing the data here. It'd be cool to be able to have a login button and be able to manage these scores and everything from within the UI. But I think that's going to be it for now. Thanks, everyone. Please like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, share it, follow me on Twitch, everything in the description.